Greetings, brave adventurers, and welcome to The Keep. My name is Lindsey the Keeper, and this is my assistant, Tao. It is that time again where people call upon Reddit and ask for judgment on a situation they went through, asking complete strangers to answer the ultimate question: were they the a-hole or not? So we have DMs and players that ask the big question of if they are indeed the a-hole or not. It's not an easy task, but it's something I take the pleasure of answering. I even made a special playlist for those who prefer more of the AITA situation than the RPG horror stories aspect. Of course, most AITA is a story itself. Whether or not it's a horror story is up to debate. Hey adventurers, here's a quick rundown on how AITA works for those who need a little reminder. The OP of the story asks Reddit if they are the a-hole or not. They explain what the situation is about and get judged by Redditors and folks like myself who read Reddit stories in general, RPGs or not. During judgment, they get labeled as the following: not the a-hole, you're the a-hole, everybody sucks here, and nobody sucks here. Understand? Good. If you agree or disagree with my verdicts, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions about it. Okay, back to the video. In today's video, I only have one story. About our OP, a dungeon master had a player that seems only to put barely a fraction of an effort into the roleplay aspect, and instead of letting this player go, they decide to attempt to kill that character and now wonders if they may have been the a-hole on their approach. Now, sit back, relax, and cuddle up to your favorite tendril as we dive in and find out if the OP was indeed the a-hole or not. Enjoy! This story was written by user FalseWeekend7354 with the title, Am I the A-hole? Bard quits my campaign after intentionally trying to kill his character. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for roughly 11 years at the time of writing this, and I'd like to think those years have offered me a pretty solid understanding of how to run a campaign. Not anything that reinvents the metaphorical wheel, mind you, and I do have the unhealthy crutch of cliches my party is probably never surprised to see in the campaigns I run. But I've only had minor complaints at worst. That was until recently when I had a player just up and leave the table in the middle of a session and texted the entire group that I was a terrible, ignorant dungeon master. Which brings me today to inquire with unbiased individuals to ask the title-urged question: am I the a-hole? I've been running this campaign for about 4 years off and on due to work schedule conflicts, university, and the occasional instance of inspirational burnout. But all these things considered, it has been nothing short of the best campaign I've ever been a part of. So many cool memories of players outsmarting me in my encounters, roleplay moments that occasionally felt like absolute cinema, and combat that, well, combat always drags on a bit too long, but that big "how do you want to do this" moment more often than not hits the table with celebration. We run this campaign from the local game shop. It's not like a big franchise or anything special in our small town in the backwoods, just a modest little shop that runs its Magic the Gathering and Warhammer 40k tournaments and the like. But every second Wednesday evening, right after 5 p.m., it's closing time and we get the place to ourselves as I run a ragtag of 7 to 8 misfits through my homebrew world to fend off the forces of impending doom. I set the scene like this to express that I'm in a pretty fortunate position, a very cool inconvenient setting, a cool and more often than not reliable group to run the game for, and the only real setback is that the owner of the store still charges us for the drinks we take from the fridge after closing time. So honestly, it's been nothing but great from my perspective. That was until the bard joined the group. At some point, the ranger of the party was talking to some friends about all of the above, plus we are now in the final arc of our campaign as level 14 characters. One of those friends, from what he later told me, just seemingly invited himself to join. He showed up with the ranger earlier in the day, and when it came to closing time, he just didn't leave. Didn't talk to me about joining or anything for the 1 or 2 hours he had been there for. Just waited until everyone else was clearing out to inform me that he was excited to play. I didn't really know him at that point. He was just kind of a face that floated in and out occasionally. And Ranger was his ride home, so he just invited himself to stay. Now, this irked me, obviously. It's rude to invite yourself to someone else's game, and on top of that, not even ask the DM until minutes before the session was about to start, but I am, unfortunately, a little bit of a pushover. We've had a bit of a revolving door of players over the years, and just recently, the cleric of the party had to bow out for the foreseeable future due to his university courses. So I somehow, through utter spinelessness, talked myself into letting him join and postponed the session for an hour to set the new player up and give him the crash course. Luckily, he already built his character and to the exact level of the rest of the party, which saved so much time. The only thing that raised an eyebrow was that he had pre-rolled his stats at home and apparently had nothing lower than a 15 after all the levelings with 2 stars at 20. I told him that this campaign uses standard array because I feel it makes the entire table feel more on equal footing, which he seems a little reluctant about, but agrees so long as he could take a first level feat. I allowed everyone else to, so that was fine with me. I gave him a crash course of the story so far, and he seemed really stoked, asking questions about how his character can be involved. Luckily, we were at a perfect point in the story for a new player to join in, as the party enters a port town looking to commandeer a vessel towards an archipelago in which a dragon's lair has been speculated to be. The bard was some Shakespearean actor that fell out of the previous limelight due to vices and cutthroat competition, so they saw a stage in which to propel themselves back into stardom. The Sovereign King happened to be a dragon masquerading as a human to hoard the wealth of the entire continent, so writing a stage play about overthrowing the tyrannical beast and making yourself the main character sounded pretty metal. All looked good as we took our seats and we got the game going. That was until he started playing the character. I get there are people who just can't roleplay because they feel embarrassed doing so or feel too self-conscious to put on a voice, so you kind of have a temper that expectations, but man, he didn't even try. I set the scene for the character introduction, and they took it as far as, "His name is Buddy McBartison. He's really famous and looks like Shakespeare, but blonde and younger." Again, I understand nerves right out of the gate, but over the course of 5 or 6 sessions, this never changed. The party stays at the local tavern. I persuade the tavern keeper that I'm so famous and don't need to pay for a room. He meets a beautiful woman in said tavern. I seduce her into joining me in bed tonight. The party asks to know more about him since he's joining them on their adventure. I tell them my entire backstory so they understand why I have joined them. He never really got out of this bare minimum interactivity with the role-playing side of things. He had friends at this table trying to engage him and his character, but even they gave up after a while, which wouldn't be too ingenuous, mind you, except anytime other people were role-playing, he kind of shoehorned himself into the scene with some quip. Buddy McBartison interrupts and asks him to get to the point of their conversation. A few people at the table, including myself, had to ask him to allow time for people to roleplay their characters even if he likes to be brief with it himself. But even though he agreed he would, he continued to interject his character just to push scenes along. I come to find out he's more into the wargaming aspects of D&D and approached the game like a meat grinder, except he's the support that debuffs the enemies en masse, and despite being a bard, had no efficiency to contribute anything entertaining otherwise. He was really starting to bring down the vibe of the table, and this is where I started to think that maybe I am the asshole. I wanted his character to die. Ranger told me that Bard's player was really attached to this character and used it in a number of campaigns that kind of just died out over time. He was really bringing down the vibe of our games, and I just didn't have the social spoons to ask him to not come back anymore. Hell, I would hate it if someone told me that, but despite my many, and I can't stress this enough, many attempts to ask him to show patience when combat isn't initiated, and not to harsh the vibes of players wanting to do some role-playing in their role-playing game, he only ever seemed to agree with me just to shut me up and not change a single thing. So I admit, when they finally encountered the dragon, I put him in the line of fire a lot with that intention in mind. Not all the time, especially if I couldn't justify it, but a lot of time the dragon had some form of hate boner for the bard that kept casting debuffs on him. By some divine intervention or lying about his damage taken, I can't honestly guess which, he pulled through. Disappointed, but not mad, I gave the description of the dragon succumbing to the wounds of magic punctures and cuts through blades and crashing into its hoard of gold and treasures that rained coin over the party in waves of fortunes. But as soon as they began to celebrate, the Sovereign King's voice could be heard, laughing in amusement. The big reveal over a year and a half, the dragon wasn't masquerading as the Sovereign King. The Sovereign King was an outer god who had been funneling the treasures to the dragon, all for the purpose of possessing his draconic body when it was at its most powerful to become my world's equivalent of a dragon lich. I put the custom miniature on the table and everyone is going nuts. I was so proud. Fortunately for them, the possession takes a lot of the outer god's power, and the dragon's physical resources were all but spent. While they were at death's door in their own right, they were going to be spared as the Dragon Lich foretold their downfall and announced his intentions to go scorch earth on the realms and then cast the gods into the ether for all eternity. I persuade him not to do that. This is an awkward, palpable silence over the table as everyone looks towards Bard. For the first time since he joined the group, he showed an emotion beyond contemptuous indifference as he leaned back in his chair with his arm crossed, perhaps even the biggest shit-eating grin I've ever seen. And, how do you do that? Far be it from me to be the DM that tells a player no when they want to try something. But he didn't sound like it was something he wanted to try. It's something he wanted to do. No change in expression whatsoever. I want a Shakespearean monologue to persuade this puny god to go back to wherever it came from and spare the realms. Awkward silence number 2, but this one came with eyes in my direction. I'm not the best at reading people's faces, but it's ranged from looking at me expectantly for a ruling, others were shaking their heads either in disbelief or mild amusement this was being attempted, to even the ranger with his face in his hands, none of which I personally translated as any of them expecting this approach to work. Okay, but how do you persuade him to do that? Oh, I don't know. I just tell him to give up and go away. He tells me blatantly like he's telling me what day of the week it was, despite 2 more attempts to try and finagle him into giving me some form of leverage or offering to prevent a catastrophic event from happening. I met at the pass every time with, I just persuade him to do it, with nothing else. He took my befuddled silence as the green light to roll his dice, and he stood up from his chair with an abrupt haste. Natural 19 plus like 12, above 30 persuasion. Now, I've seen this expression many times throughout this campaign. That just enough to be a do or die DC, or getting just enough damage for a how do you want to do this moment. That hype feeling of the right roll at the right time, and as he looked left and right for that celebration of achieving that seemingly impossible nothing. Not so much as a word from anybody, as they apparently knew what I was going to say before I even needed to. Unfortunately, you offered nothing to persuade him into ceasing his invention. He doesn't perceive you accumulatively as a threat to be intimidated, and even if you were deceiving him into backing off, he's not going to be coerced into abandoning his grand design. He sat back down. I continued to monologue in an attempt to get over the awkwardness of the interruption, but after a few sentences, it was hard not to notice him putting his character sheet and books away before sliding his backpack over his shoulder, and while not saying anything, storming out of the store, made even more awkward as once again, the ranger was his ride home. I tell the party we'll retcon everything up until the Outer God's transformation and pick things up again in 2 weeks' time. It just felt uncomfortable now, and the ranger probably needed to chase Bard down to get him home safely, so it felt like the right thing to do. But I admit I felt like an asshole. I'm not asking you, dear Redditors, to judge if this guy was the asshole. After all, spitting the dummy when you don't get your way in a game of Dungeons & Dragons while also being a scene hog is arguably asshole behavior no matter how you dissect it, especially if it's only from my perspective you draw your information from. But I kinda wanted this to happen, just not like that. I wanted him to leave of his own accord because I was too anxious to ask him to. I wanted to kill his character or just wanted Ranger to stop bringing him all together. Whatever would get him to stop hashing the vibes of this game I had otherwise loved running for friends. I can understand on a mechanical level where he might have been under the impression his persuasion roll would accomplish what he wanted. The core rulebook designates a DC 30 for impossible tasks, but how lame would it have been even if that is how we run the game? If you could just talk to the BBEG out of the world domination with vague ideas and basically morality like some poorly written anime protagonist. How cinematic a climax would that be? I don't regret telling him his persuasion didn't work. Natural 20s, or any high roll for that matter, doesn't mean you can just chug lava without consequences. But I do feel like the asshole because I had malicious intent to have him leave the table prior, and when I finally got that, it felt wrong. I could have approached the rejection of his idea better, as I feel it may have come across as condescending. Maybe I should have just worked up the guts to just ask him not to come back to our games since he takes expectations to how I run them. Either way, I woke up the next day to messages from my players that Bard had messaged them all individually saying I am an ignorant wannabe know-it-all DM and a piece of shit for taking away his player agency and awesome character moment. While they've all assured me they don't think the same, I feel that may also come from bias since I am probably the only person who runs games for them and they don't want to discourage me for their own sake. Maybe that's just the sudden imposter syndrome talking. After that incident, Bard has been making eyes at me across the store during work hours and has told me to give yourself anytime I tried to approach some kind of discussion. He even went as far as to ask the store owner to tell me to leave whenever he's in the store. But obviously he has no reason to do that and suggested if he's got the problem, maybe he should be the one to leave. He hasn't been back for about 5 days at the time of writing this, with the ranger seemingly the only one who still actively talks to him. Apparently, he messaged the rest of the group individually to invite them to his own campaign, but they've all politely declined, mostly because he didn't resonate a DM who prioritized what they'd call fun in their eyes. While I don't want to kick dirt at the guy further, I can't pretend my opinion wouldn't be the same. I postponed our next session because I do still feel quite guilty, and I feel like the asshole. And not in the karma farming, I didn't do anything wrong, but I am wrong way I've seen a number of times on AITA posts. I genuinely held discontent for their arrival at games and wanted them to just go away. If there are questions, I'll try to answer them, but Reddit, am I the a-hole? Edit 1. After seeing a lot of responses saying I should have just said no to the bard's attempt to talk down the world-ending threat because reasons, yeah, maybe I should have. From my perspective, in that very moment, the task as he worded it, or rather how he didn't word it, was not going to happen by any stretch of the imagination. A part of me, despite these grievances I had with the player's approach to the game, wanted to see him actually putting forward something of a meaningful effort. Maybe if he worded it like he wanted to persuade the Dracolich to be ready to be stopped by this band of heroes, he could have accomplished maybe in their greater plans to try and plan more around them. Or maybe even persuade the prideful deity to hasten its recovery so that the party can face it when it's not 100% later down the line. I admit, there was a lot of mental gymnastics I was playing in that moment while trying to squeeze blood from the stone. I didn't want to spoon feed him an alternative scenario or a no but, because quite frankly, I wanted him to contribute something other than bard spells and combat for a change. In a perfect world, a Shakespearean bard commanding a Dracolich to prepare itself for its demise sounds cool as f***. Unfortunately, that perfect world isn't one where the player of said bard is conversationally stunted. I never said no because I was fishing for him to word it differently or give me any little details as how it could even slightly work enough to justify his proposed action. I guarantee after his many refusals to give more than that vague request, I would have mostly likely messaged him after the session and told him that I don't think this was the table for him. But you know what they say about hindsight. Edit 2. In response to people telling me I should have tried talking it out with him about how he played, I did. Multiple times. Before games, after games, during the mid-game breaks, even on days when we were just at the store at the same time. He kept giving me lip service about how he tried to get more into the narrative aspect of the game, but never did. Do I regret not putting my foot down more or putting forward an ultimatum for the sake of the table and my own enjoyment of the game? Absolutely. Then I remember my first few months playing the game where I probably wasn't much better, so I made excuses for him and eased up. It's something I'm going to have to get better at, obviously. I tried avoiding conflict and accommodating a friend of a friend, and it bit me in the ass. End of story. So, as a general rule of thumb, if you have friends who show an interest in playing D&D or any other tabletop games, you need to ask your DM if it's cool to add one more person in the group. The reason for it is because 1, it's being polite and it shows consideration to your DM, and 2, if the DM allows your friend to join, it gives them time to have essentially an interview and expectations of the campaign and setting, basically their own session 0. But instead, your ranger player brought in a friend and you had no choice between turning them away or let them join in that moment. As for the lack of roleplay from the bard, I am going to provide my personal advice for those who are shy roleplayers. You do not need to be a professional in the theater arts to roleplay your characters. Take it from someone who tries their best to make different voices while reading RPG horror stories. I may suck at doing the male voices, but I believe I am decent when it comes to the female voices or even children voices. But as long as you try, you can become better at it. But Bard didn't bother to try. He could have been an amazing bard if he attempted a fracture of roleplay in his Shakespearean style. But instead, he just makes a statement with no explanation on how or why he should succeed in an impossible task. However, even though we can agree that Bard is indeed an asshole in the story, you are not entirely innocent. The biggest issue is that you didn't stop his disruptive behavior which caused displeasure not only to yourself, but to the rest of your players. Not only that, you stated that you have tried talking to him many times and they only gave you lip service in return. But I am going to assume that this was your attempt of doing the "Excuse me, where? Can you please put in more effort?" instead of going the route of, "Hey, your game style is not working. Here are the reasons why. I can help you out so you can be more comfortable, or if it's too much, you can leave the table." That's it. Trying to use the BBEG to try and kill the PC is a major dick move. Having said all that, you are the asshole. It's not a big one, but I hope in the future you learn to set boundaries and take responsibility as a dungeon master. Normally, I would have 2 more stories to read, but I'm trying out a shorter format style if it's possible. It's sort of the same thing I did when I first started out on my channel, where I would post 10 to maybe 25 minutes of content of a single story. Let me know in the comments if you like this format more, or if you prefer my longer ones, or both if you enjoy both styles. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to give me more support, you can follow me on my socials through my Linktree, and if you have stories you want me to read, please post them on my subreddit or email it to me. Until then, may you find your worth in the waking world.